And there are about 12 verses like that where significant lines are repeated, and we'll see how many we can discuss today. So let's begin with the second chapter. Generally, whenever we hear a discussion, say if two people are talking, now when might their discussion interest us? There are broadly three possibilities. One is that we are concerned about either of those people, and when they are talking, we want to know what they are talking about. That's the time. That's one situation we might be interested. Second is the topic that they are discussing, that itself is of interest or relevance for us. Maybe it could be anything. It could be something spiritual that we're interested in. It could be something social, something political. It might be something good, it might be something bad. It's the people who they're talking that interests us. Or sometimes it might be that the sheer way of presenting is itself so sweet. Some people, what they speak might not be very meaningful or attractive, but they're sweet talkers. Not the word sweet talking usually has a negative connotation, but just some people may have just a sweet way of speaking that we just get attracted by that. So it's the speakers, it's the content, or it's the presentation, the style. One of these may attract us and may interest us. So now the Gita, it's usually we talk about its philosophy and its wisdom, and that is no doubt important. But while we are talking about it, we might forget that actually the Gita is a conversation between two people. And these two are very close, loving friends. And of course, it's the Lord and the devotee, but they are in a friendly relationship. So Krishna is addressing Arjuna. And we will see that the Gita begins with Arjuna in grief, Arjuna in lamentation. So Arjuna is having tears in his eyes. And, and normally, now if we see somebody crying, we would be immediately concerned, why is such a person crying? And especially if we see somebody like a warrior, some Arjuna who is crying, and Arjuna is crying in public, the trauma that he must be going through at that time to be in tears must be enormous. Otherwise, why would somebody cry to that extent? So Arjuna is in great grief. And Arjuna's grief, if somebody is in grief, a normal tendency, a basic human tendency of based on decency is that we try to allay their grief, we try to address their grief. So Krishna is addressing Arjuna's grief, no doubt. But how is he addressing it? It's a deep grief based, it's a deep sense of lamentation based on a foundational misunderstanding, and he's trying to address that. So sometimes when we see Krishna speaking philosophy, we may say, is this philosophy actually addressing Arjuna's concern? Yes, it is. So how is it addressing? The second chapter 2.1 begins with Arjuna in tears. Krupaya Vishtam, Ashru Purna Kulekshanam. His eyes are brimming with tears. And Krishna, when responding to him, now this, you see, in this is second chapter itself. And in the second chapter, these are Nanu Shochitum verses. Do not lament. So here we'll see 225. It ends with Nanu Shochitum Arhasi. Then 26 is Nainam Shochitum Arhasi. 27 is Natvam Shochitum Arhasi. And then 30th is Natvam Shochitum Arhasi. So Arhasi means it does not behoove you. Shochitum means lament. So 27 and 30 are literally equivalent. Natvam Shochitum Arhasi. It is the same thing. And the other previous two are Nanu Shochitum Arhasi and Nainam Shochitum Arhasi. Nainam Shochitum Arhasi. These are very similar. They're not exactly the same, but they are very similar. So the idea here is that Krishna is addressing Arjuna's concern. Krishna is telling him that it does not behoove you to lament. So we may say, what does it mean it does not behoove you to lament? So, sometimes if a child is playing some game, say the child is playing some Dungeons and Dragons or some game like that, and say the child loses that game. Now, children may take a game so seriously that if they lose it, they may just burst into tears. But if an adult starts crying like that, it does not behoove you. This, you need to outgrow this. Yes, even adults may play games and they may get involved in games, but to get so carried away or to get so caught in the games as to start crying, that does not behoove an adult. So similarly, when Krishna is telling Arjuna, he is not saying don't lament. He's saying it does not behoove you to lament. There's a difference between the two. There is grief as an emotion or anger or fear or whatever. We can't entirely control our emotions. At one level, emotions are just psychological reactions to life events. Just as now in many parts of the world, both in India as well as in America, it's very cold. So now when somebody is feeling cold, we can't tell them don't feel cold. Say, what do you mean don't feel cold? I am feeling cold. But if they let the cold control their actions, now it does not behoove you to keep complaining about the cold, to give into the cold and to just stay under a comforter and not do any activity at all. No, we all have our duties to do. We all have responsibilities to do. And we need to equip ourselves. Maybe wear warm clothes and then go out. So it does not behoove you. We will not try to say to someone, it does not behoove you to feel cold. What do you mean? I'm feeling cold. But it does not behoove you to give in to the cold and not do any activity. Arjuna is to lament and give up your duty. So why? Why should you not lament? Because the soul is eternal. You are thinking about the death of your loved ones, but they are not going to die. They are eternal. You are eternal. They are eternal. Everyone is eternal. So in some ways, our emotions are not in our control. They just come automatically. But education, what it does is education helps, education or knowledge or growth. We could talk about all of these are related. Through education, we gain knowledge, and through knowledge, we grow. So when we grow, then the emotions, even if they come, we won't let them control us. So it does not behoove a person to lament like this. So Krishna is telling Arjuna that do not lament. So in a space of 6 verses from 25 to 30, Krishna repeats that na shochitum arhasi, that it does not behoove you to lament. So Krishna is telling us that our education is meant to elevate our emotion. So knowledge is seen not just in terms of what we can quote, but knowledge is seen in terms of the emotions that control us. Emotions may come upon us, but with greater knowledge, we won't let those emotions control us. So that is the theme over here. Nantvam shochitum arhasi. The Gita doesn't ask us to become unemotional, but Gita by our emotions. So this is the second chapter where there is a significant repetition of one particular theme. Now, let's move on to another repetition that we see. This is text 61. And Krishna says over here, Tani sarvani sanyamya yukta asita matparaha vashehi yasyendriyani tasya pragya pratisthita. So Krishna is saying, Yukta asita matparaha. He's telling Arjuna that fix your consciousness on me. So Tani sarvani sanyamya, control all your senses and fix your consciousness on me. And in this way, you will conquer your senses. Vashehi yasyendriyani. So sanyamya is more of control. Vasha is conquest. So it says control your senses as much as you can and fix your consciousness on me. And when your consciousness becomes fixed on me, then what will happen? You will conquer your senses. And one who has conquered his senses in this way, tasya pragya pratisthita, such a person is well situated. Such a person is situated. So this is the key phrase over here. Yukta asita matparaha. Krishna is telling Arjuna, be fix your consciousness on me. So now in this repetition, we will also see some contextualization. How the same verse in different, same set of words in different contexts has different meanings. So here we go to the 6th chapter, Manasanyamya Machitta. Then after that, what is comes is Yukta Asita Matparaha. So exactly same phrase comes over here. Now, Yukta Asita Matparaha. See, quite often when we study the Bhagavad Gita, we often quote certain verses from the Gita, and there are many important verses which may quote for fundamental philosophical points, and that's important. At the same time, the Gita has its own flow. And the Gita has its own development of thought. And for study the Gita with Krishna in the center. Now, of course, Krishna is the purpose of the Gita, but there is a development of thought in the Gita by which Krishna gradually comes to the center. So, in the 2nd chapter, Krishna doesn't talk about himself as the goal of, he is in the 2nd chapter, as per the flow of the Gita, Krishna is simply the teacher of sense control. Krishna is not talking about himself as God. He's not talking about himself as the supreme object of devotion. He's simply acting as a teacher, as a person who is teaching sense control. But while teaching that, so it's like, suppose you're going on a treasure hunt. And when we are going on a treasure hunt, at that time, the treasure might be far away. And especially if you're taking, say, kids on a treasure hunt or a chest or some, and then if it's a long trail, the kids might not want to go along that trail. So then what happens? A good trail organizer, they drop some treats along the way. They're going along the way and you say, hey, there's a chocolate over there. There's this thing over there. There's that over there. So what happens? Those treats along the way spur the person to keep moving. They've not yet come to the ultimate treasure, but they're treats along the way. So Krishna's message of love, which we discussed yesterday in Manmana Bhaumad Bhakto, that is the ultimate conclusion of the Gita. But that Krishna is the object of devotion, Krishna is the Lord of our life, Krishna is the all attractive supreme reality. This is the message toward which the Gita goes gradually. This is not the message consistently there in the Gita. Gita is progressing toward that. But while it is progressing toward that destination, Krishna drops some treats along the way. So in the 2nd chapter of the Gita, where we are discussing this, now this is the only reference by Krishna to himself, Yukself, in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. In the 2nd chapter, Krishna is primarily focusing on analyzing the difference between the body and the soul, talking about how one can act without attachment, with dispassion, and how to stay equipoised amidst life's ups and downs. So he's focusing at the level of rising beyond bodily emotion. Now, he's not talking directly about devotion, but even when he's talking about rising beyond bodily emotion, he gives this nugget, he gives this treat. Yukta Sita Matparaha. So in the overall 2nd chapter, Krishna is the teacher of sense control. But while telling he's a teacher of the sense control, he also reveals that actually I am the object of the controlled senses. It is not just we want to control the senses, but after controlling the senses, what we do? We want to control the senses so that we can offer our senses to the supreme controller. And that's how. So that is the context over here. Now, if you go to the 6th chapter, in the same pana, but here what is happening? The 6th chapter is Ashtanga Yoga. And in this also, Krishna goes in a significant level of detail in describing how the process of yoga is to be practiced. Go to a secluded place, sit erect, with the back, the neck, with the back, the neck, and the head in a straight line, and then stare forward, either at the tip of the nose or in the space between the eyebrows. And he gives sit on a kusha grass, and he gives somewhat detailed descriptions. But even while he's doing that, he's pointing that ultimately what is to be done. So here he says, okay, the verses 11 and 12 talk about the externals of how yoga is to be practiced. Then 13 starts moving from the external toward the internal. And 14 focuses on the internal. So prashantatma vigatabhir brahmachari vrate sthitaha manasanyamya machitto yukta asita matparaha. So he's talking over here that Prashantatma, make your mind peace, mind crazy. One is fear and other is desire. So Vigata Bhir Brahmachari Pratesthitaha. So give up fear, give up desire. In this way, calm your mind and then focus your consciousness on Yukta Asita Matparaha. Now, here, when Krishna is talking about fixing the mind on him, this is a part of the process of Ashtanga Yoga. So the phrase is the same, the directive is the same, but the context is different. The process he's talking about is different. Now, in the process of Ashtanga Yoga, some yogis treat Krishna as an object of meditation, but it's a transitional object of meditation. They think that we'll meditate on Krishna and then ultimately we will merge with in the Brahman, or we'll go to some reality beyond Krishna. So for them, Krishna is like a tool for meditation. And Krishna acknowledges, yes, you can have me as a tool for meditation, but in the same chapter, as he moves forward, in the later verses in 630 or 647, he talks about he's not. So, Yukta Asita Matparaha is not just something to be done as a part of sadhana. In the sadhya stage also, Yomam Pashyati Sarvatra, Sarvam Chamai Pashyati. The great devotees, they see me, the great spiritualists, the most evolved spiritualists, they see me everywhere and they see everything in me. And Yoginampi Sarvesham Madgatena Antaratmana Shraddhavan Bhajate Yomam Same Yuktatamo Mataha. Those yogis are most intimately united with me. So Yukta Asita Matparaha. So whatever is Krishna is giving toward the conclusion of the Gita, Prabhupada is, Krishna also drops hints of it throughout the Gita. And herein we see how Prabhupada is so brilliant in his commentary. If you look at the 6th chapter itself, here in the previous verses, Shucha Udeshit, go to a forest and sit in a secluded place. So Krishna is giving this, and Prabhupada in his commentary is saying, actually, this is not practical in Kali Yuga. That we can't go to the forest, but we should sit at home and meditate. We should sit and chant the holy names and meditate, fix our mind on Krishna. Now, when we read this, there's one scholar, he says, this is outrageous. That here, instead of when a commentary is meant to expand on what is said in the text, but Bhaktivedanta Swami, far from expanding what is there on the text, he's cancelling what is there in the text. So, first of all, a commentary that cancels the text, that itself is wrong. And on top of that, he says Bhaktivedanta Swami has the audacity to cancel the words of Krishna and then claim that his Bhagavad Gita is as it is. He says, this is outrageous. How can he do that? But here we have to understand Prabhupada is not playing any kind of tricks. If Prabhupada wanted to cancel Krishna's words, no, Prabhupada could have avoided giving the Sanskrit. Prabhupada could have just given a translation and commentary. And there are many people who write on the Gita, they just give translation and commentaries. And Prabhupada doesn't just give the Sanskrit translation. So Prabhupada doesn't just give the Sanskrit. He also gives the Sanskrit transliteration. He also gives the word-to-word translation. So Prabhupada is not hiding anything. Prabhupada is giving us full access to Krishna's. In fact, if you look at traditional Sanskrit commentaries, the tradition is not to give word-to-word translations. There is a particular because Sanskrit is a language which is, each language has its own distinct characteristics, and quite often Sanskrit is a very poetic language. So the rules of grammar in Sanskrit are significantly different from, say, the rules of language grammar in English. So what happens when traditionally commentators would say the books would be written in Sanskrit and the commentaries would be written in Sanskrit also. So at that time, what they would do is they didn't give a word-to-word translation, but they would rearrange the words, because Sanskrit, often the Bhagavad Gita is a Gita, it's a poetry. So in poetry, sometimes what happens is we may rearrange the words. I am going there. That might be English way of saying, normal prose way of saying this. Going there am I. That might be a more poetic way of saying it. So in the traditional commentaries, what they would do is they would not give a word-to-word translation, but they would do a rearranging of the words, and so that the words flow in a particular sequence. And that's also important, but that's quite intricate. So Prabhupada gives us full access to Krishna's words by giving us the Sanskrit, by giving us the transliteration, and by giving us the word-to-word translation. And then he gives us translation and he gives us purports. So Prabhupada, yes, is he cancelling Krishna's words? Yes, if you look at it from literal perspective, what Krishna is saying in the verse and what Prabhupada is saying in the purport seem to be opposite. However, Prabhupada is not cancelling. Why? Because if you want to literally talk about cancelling, if you want to use that provocative word cancelling, then Krishna himself is cancelling his words. When Krishna says, Sarva dharman parityajya, mam ekam sharanam vraja, just give up all varieties of dharma and just surrender to me. When he's saying that, what is he doing? He's cancelling everything else that he has said previously. He says, just do this, mam ekam sharanam vraja. Now, actually speaking, the more precise word would be culmination is the development of something to the highest level. So Krishna is, we could say, giving messages at various levels. So just like the standard example we give of math, for a small child who is in primary math, you may say 3 minus 7 is not possible. But for a student who goes to a higher level, you say 3 minus 7, yes, it's possible. So at one level, you may say that the 7th grade math teacher is cancelling what the 3rd grade math teacher is teaching. No, it's just there is a progression, there is a continuation, and there is an evolution. So, and there is, in the evolution, there can be a culmination. Culmination is where something attains its highest point. So what is happening is that Krishna is giving his message, and the message comes to a highest point. That comes in the conclusion. So what Krishna gives in the conclusion, he also drops hints of it throughout the Gita. However, Prabhupada takes those hints and makes them into purports. So when what Prabhupada is doing is, he's not cancelling Krishna's words. He is giving throughout the Gita very clearly what Krishna is stating clearly at the end of the Gita. And why is Prabhupada doing this? Now, Prabhupada was speaking and writing to people who had very little knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita, very little knowledge even of spirituality in general. So Prabhupada's mood was that if a person opens any page of his books, in every page they should get the essential message. That was Prabhupada's mood. And so what Prabhupada is doing is, it's not cancellation, it's actually compassion. So yes, there is systematic thought, word by word, verse by verse flow of the Gita. That analysis can also be done. And Prabhupada's purports contain pointers for that kind of analysis also. But what Prabhupada is doing is, he's actually giving Krishna's concluding message throughout the Gita. And Krishna is also pointing towards his concluding message throughout the Gita. Like Yukta Asita Matparaha, he says, just fix your mind on me. That is the conclusion of the Gita. But Krishna is also dropping hints of that throughout the Gita. And Prabhupada does the same thing. That is Prabhupada's brilliance. So Yukta Asita Matparaha. Now, so here I talked about how the words are the same and the import is the same, but the context makes it slightly different. Yukta Asita Matparaha in the 2nd chapter is a part of Karma Yoga. In the 6th chapter, Yukta Asita Matparaha is a part of Dhyan Yoga. Now, Yukta Asita Matparaha is also the essence of Bhakti Yoga. That fixing the mind on Krishna is also the essence of Bhakti Yoga. So what Krishna is doing in Machitto. So here the word is, let's look at this. This is Machitto. And this same, sorry, what happened? This Machitta also comes in the 12th chapter of the Gita. It actually comes in the 10th chapter, it comes in the 12th chapter, but let's look at it in the 10th chapter now, first. in the famous Chaturshloki Gita, it comes in man, sorry. So Machitta, Machitta Madgata Prana Bodhayantah Parasparam Kathayantascha Mam Nityam Tushyanti Charamanti Cha. So Machitta is just two words, but they're very significant. Now, if you see the translation, a simple translation could be fix your mind on me. But Prabhupada gives a very beautiful poetic translation. He says, the thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. So there is a significant difference. Mat chitta can mean fix your consciousness on me. Chitta means consciousness, mat means me. So fix your consciousness on me. So for those who are practicing Ashtanga Yoga, for them, Krishna is a tool for their meditation. So they fix their consciousness on me, on Krishna. But for devotees, for now in the 10th chapter, Krishna is talking about bhakti. And the Chaturshloki Gita 10.8 to 11, this is clearly about bhakti. Every single verse is about bhakti. And Krishna's special mercy on the bhaktas. So here, when Krishna is using the same word, machitta, now here it's not fix your consciousness on me as a tool for meditation. Here it is, Krishna is not the tool of meditation, Krishna is the goal of meditation. So goal means that is what we want to focus our mind on. Now for all of us, our thoughts dwell somewhere. Our thoughts wander over many places, but they dwell somewhere. We all have a home for our thoughts. And that home is usually the object that we are most attached to. Somebody who is big time into sports, maybe they're baseball or cricket, then cricket is their mental home, is the home for their thoughts. That means as soon as they have nothing to think about, their thoughts will go over there. And sometimes even when they have other things to think about, still their thoughts go over there. Just like our home, when we have nowhere to go, we come back home. We may go out for doing various kinds of work, but as soon as the work is done, we come back home. So like that, for the great devotees, their thoughts may also go in different directions. They may have various things to think about. But as soon as the various issues thinking is over, immediately come back home. Their thoughts come back to Krishna. For Bhishma Pitama, it is said in the first canto, 9th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, that great person who had fought over 1,000 battles, who had fought thousands of battles and spoken on thousands of subjects, then he withdrew his consciousness and his thinking, feeling and willing, he invested it all in Krishna. So that is what he did at the end of his life. So for him, his thoughts, always the home was Krishna, but because he was a warrior, he was an administrator, so he had to have his thoughts going in various directions. But they all came back to Krishna. They centered on Krishna toward the end of his life exclusively. So machitta is the same word, but the meaning is dependent on the context. So the meaning evolves, and Prabhupada's translations also, if we look at them, they reveal the evolution of meaning as per the context. Now, let's look at another set of verses where the context makes things substantially different. So this is chapter 2, text 70. Here it is. Avinashi tu tadviddi yena sarvamidam tatam vinasham avyayasyasya kaschit kartum arhati na kaschit kartum arhati. So Krishna is talking here about the Atma, the soul. Avinashi tu tadviddi. This is indestructible, and yena sarvam idam tatam. By it, everything is pervaded. Sarvam idam tatam. And then vinasham avyayasyasya na kaschit kartum arhati. That nobody can destroy this. Nobody at all can destroy this because it's indestructible. Avyayasya. So yena sarvam idam tatam. Now what does this yena sarvam idam tatam refer to? It refers to the soul. It refers to the soul pervades the entire body. Now, if we move to another verse in the Gita, this is 1846. Here also you will see the same phrase. Yena sarvam idam tatam. By him, by it, everything is pervaded. So now what is this referring to? Yatah pravrittir bhutanam yena sarvam idam tatam swakarmana tam abhyarcha siddhim vindati manava. So yatah pravrittir bhutanam, from whom everything has come and by whom everything is pervaded. Swakarmana tam abhyarcha, by your work worship that Lord, worship that reality, and then you will attain perfection. Siddhim vindati manava. In this way, you will attain perfection. So, although here the phrase is the same, yena sarvamidam tatam, but there is a significant difference. Yena sarvamidam tatam here refers to the Lord, and sarvam refers here not to the body but to the whole universe. So, by the whole universe is pervaded by the Lord, and that Lord we should worship. Now, some people, some Gita commentators, they take this yena sarvamidam tatam. Here clearly it refers to the Lord who pervades all of existence. And they say 217 also is referring to the same thing. That this is also referring, the soul pervades all existence. And they use this to say that actually there is just one soul in all bodies, that we are all one. However, that is not at all justified based on the context. Because just a few verses later, this is 17, and just a few verses later, Krishna talks about in 22 how the soul gives up one body and goes to another body. If it is one soul that is pervading all bodies, then what is the point of saying that the soul will give up one body and go to another body? And Krishna is talking very clearly. Tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani sanyanti navani dehi. He gives up one body, vihaya, and accepts another body. So it's talking about transmigration, which involves travel. So if there's one soul pervading all bodies, then how can the soul give up one body and go to another body? So that sarvam, and this is not just 22 before. Krishna has, before that, if you go to 11 and 12, 13 especially, dehinosmin yatha dehe. He's talking about a soul which is inside the body. So he's talking about one body and the soul inside the body. So although the word sarvam is used, sarvam refers here not to all of existence, but sarvam refers to all, the whole body. So consciousness permeates and pervades the entire body. Although the soul is localized in one place in the region of the heart, but this consciousness pervades the entire body. And in this way, the same phrase can have different meanings. Now, I'll talk about 2 or 3 more verses because there's a lot we could talk about, but let's look at this one now. So this is a theme which Krishna talks about. This is a well-known verse, 8-7 in the Gita. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mamanusmayudhya mai arpita mano buddhir mamevaishyasya asamshayah. So actually here there is a lot from this verse which is repeated. There is tasmat sarveshu, then there is mai arpita mano buddhir, then there is mam evaishyasya, and then there is asamshayah. So all these are very significant words, and all these words are repeated in different phrases or different verses in the Gita in different places. So let's look at Tasmat Sarveshu. In the same 8th chapter of the Gita, Krishna toward the end says, Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Yoga Yukto Bhava Arjuna. So the same phrase is there, Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu. Therefore, at all times. So this is 8:27, and the earlier was 8:7. So what is, let's look at the phrase and see what is the similarity and what is the difference. So tasmat sarveshu kaleshu, therefore at all times, ma manusmara yudhya, you remember me and fight. Mai arpita mano buddhir. In this way, if your mind and intelligence are fixed on me, then what will happen? Mam evaishyasya asamshayah, you will surely come to me. So Krishna is telling Arjuna over here, more important than your externals are your internals. Arjuna is thinking, fighting a war, which most people would think we fight a war to gain property, to gain a kingdom. How is that spiritual? Krishna says spirituality is determined not by so much by your external as by your internals. If your mind and intelligence are not just fixed on me, Krishna says, Arpita mano buddhir. Arpita means offered to me. So fixed means that, say, we sometimes put some money in some fixed deposit. It's our money, but we have fixed it over there, maybe for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and then we take it out from there. So fixed means it's ours, but we fix it there. But offered means we give it to that person. So it's like we offer some donation, we offer some contribution. So when we offer something, in a sense, it's no longer ours. It's offered. So when Krishna is using the word Mai Arpita Mano Buddhir, what that means is that for a devotee doesn't just think that, okay, this is my life and I am giving it to Krishna. A devotee thinks my everything belongs to Krishna, and I'm simply returning to Krishna what belongs to him. Tadiya vastum govindam, that it is your thing which it is your, everything is yours, O Lord, and I return it to you. So if somebody has got that consciousness, Mai Arpita, if that arpana has been done, if that offering has been done, then that person, Krishna says, will surely attain me. So in this context, this is a clearly devotional verse, Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu. Now if you look at 8:27, what is going on over here? Krishna has, before these verses, he has talked about how there are different paths for perfection on the process of yoga. And if you die at a particular time, you get a particular destination. If you die at another time, you get a different destination. And yogis try to slow down their breath so that they can live for a longer time, and then they can die at an auspicious time. But Krishna says over here, Arjuna, if you are devoted to me, then you don't have to bother about anything. Naite sruti partha janan yogi muhyati kaschana. That yogi, he will talk about which is the yogi he's talking about. He's talking about a bhakti yogi, as the subsequent verses will make it clear. He says, the yogis who are devoted to me, they are not worried about what time they will leave the body. Why? Because they know I will take care of them. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu yoga yukto bhava Arjuna. So in this context, the sarveshu kaleshu has a specific significance. It does mean at all times. But in the previous verses, there was a lot of question about timing. Oh, you have to, those who die in the time of light, those who die in the time of dark. Krishna says, don't worry about the time. Just focus on your consciousness. You focus your consciousness on me, and then you will come to me. So this is a very reassuring verse for the sadhakas who understand that actually Krishna is our Lord. And there is sometimes the fear for devotees that we may strive to practice bhakti, but what if we are not able to remember Krishna at the time of death? What if we die suddenly, we die in an accident, we die by a heart attack, and we're not able to remember Krishna at that time? What happens? So Krishna says, don't worry. Actually, this is his assurance. Just you try to fix your consciousness while you can. And there is the famous pastime of Ramanujarya asked his guru, Kanchipuram, to ask Varadraj, his worshipable Lord, what happens to a devotee who can't remember Krishna at the time of death? So the Lord replied that I remember the devotee at the time of death, and I will manifest in the devotee's heart and give my remembrance to him. So this is Krishna assuring Arjuna, don't worry about timings. Just focus on connecting with me and everything, and you will attain perfection thereafter. So this is Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu. So I said that I was talking about 8:7. Almost every part of it is repeated other times. Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu we discussed. Now let's look at Mai Arpit Mano Buddhir. So here Krishna in the 8th chapter, what is he doing? In the 6th chapter, he has described the process of Ashtanga Yoga. And in the 8th chapter, in the 7th chapter, he talks about Bhakti Yoga. And in the 8th chapter, he compares Ashtanga Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. And he shows how Bhakti Yoga is much, much easier as compared to Ashtanga Yoga. And in that way, he encourages everyone to practice Bhakti Yoga. So, Mai Arpita Mano Buddhir, here it is spoken in the context of how Bhakti is much easier than Ashtanga Yoga. And in fact, he will talk about this for 7 verses later. In 8:14, he will say that Tasyaham Sulabha Partha. the person who fixes their mind on me, person who is devoted to me, that person will easily attain me. Sulabha. There's no other place in the Gita where Krishna says, I'll be easily attained. So this is Mayi Arpita Mano Buddhir. Now let's look at where this particular phrase is repeated again. Now if you see over here, this is 12th chapter, text 13 and 14. So here also it is Mayi Arpita Mano Buddhir, or here also Mayi Arpita Mano Buddhir. So what is going on over here? Here Krishna is describing the qualities of his devotees. In the 12th chapter, from text 13 to text 20, he describes the virtues of his devotees. So the point over here is, it is important to be devoted to Krishna, but when we are devoted to Krishna, that devotion needs to be accompanied by and manifested through various virtues. So a devotee is peaceful, a devotee is polite, a devotee is gentle, a devotee is diligent. So all these are characteristics of a devotee. So and he says, Mai arpita mano buddhir. So if the devotee offers their mind and intelligence to me, then what happens? Mad bhaktaha same priyaha. Mad bhaktaha same priyaha. Such a devotee is very dear to me. Now, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita, there are several other phrases which are repeated. And if the repetition is very clear in the context, then I'm not going to discuss that. So, for example, in the 12th chapter, Krishna is describing various verses which define his devotee. So, Mad Bhakta Same Priyaha, Yo Mad Bhakta Same Priya, Bhaktiman Same Priyaha. So, there Krishna is talking about all the devotees who have these qualities, they are dear to me. So, this is something similar to Nainam Shochitum Arhasi. So, that was one sample which we took. And there's another sample over here which I'll just mention, but I will not discuss this. But this, Srila Prabhupada, in his introduction to the Gita, talks about this as, this is the secret of the Bhagavad Gita. This is the essential message of the Gita. If we fix our mind and intelligence on Krishna, then that itself is the perfection of life. And by that, we will surely attain him. Now, the Gita begins with Arjuna not being sure of what to do. So that decision of what to do and what not to do, that is indicated through one verse, or rather through one theme. That theme runs throughout the Gita. But here there is pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. Now the pravritti refers to that which we are inclined to do and we do it. Nivrittim cha means that which we may incline to do but we avoid doing it. So vritti refers to the movement of our consciousness. We could call it a mental tendency or inclination. Just like if we have a floor, the floor is straight, then if water falls on it, it will stay as it is. But if the floor is inclined, water falls at one place, it will start going in a particular direction. So similarly, what Krishna speaks over here is that, so vritti means the inclination of our inner world, the inclination of our consciousness. So our consciousness will naturally go in particular directions. So the word is vritti is like the root word, and then vritti is there, and then there is pravritti, pra comes before, and nivritti. So Krishna, pra means yes, that is where your consciousness will go and it is good, let it go in that direction. Nivritti means that don't let your consciousness go in that direction. Even if it is going in that direction, restrain yourself. So pravrittim cha nivrittim cha refers primarily to the inner movements of consciousness, where they're naturally going, where to let it go and where to not let it go. And that is also naturally, that is also eventually expressed through outer actions. Which actions we should do and which actions we should not do. So here in the 16th chapter, Krishna is describing the demoniac nature. He's describing people with the demoniac nature, and he says about them, pravrittim cha nivrittim cha janana vidura asuraha na shaucham na pichacharo na satyam teshu vidyate. Says that those who are demoniac, they don't know what is to be done and what is not to be done. And in them, there is no cleanliness, there is no proper behavior, and ultimately there is no truth. Na satyam teshu vidyate. Why no truth? Because if one is not connected with, one is not behaving properly, one cannot be grounded in truth. One may speak truth, but if one's actions are not in harmony with what one is speaking, then there is no enduring truth within such a person. So nasatyam teshu vidyate. So here Krishna talks about pravritti and nivritti. And he says that in the demoniac people, this is not known. What is to be done and what is not to be done. What is to be thought about, what is not thought about, that is not known. Now, if you move to the 18th chapter, the exact same thing comes. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. And here Krishna is talking about what? He's talking about buddhi, intelligence in the mode of goodness. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha karya karye bhaya bhaye bandham moksham cha ya vetti buddhi sa parth satviki. So he says sattvic buddhi, that means that intelligence that is well situated, that intelligence which is in the mode of goodness. What does it do? It knows which movements of consciousness are desirable, which movements of consciousness are undesirable. So this is pravrittim cha nivrittim cha refers to the inner world, the movements of consciousness in the inner world. And then karya karye refers to which actions are to be done, which actions are not to be done. Then bhaya bhaye refers to, yesterday I talked about what is to be feared and what is not to be feared. So with education, by education, we grow out of some fears and we grow into some fears. Something which a small child, if he's playing with some dangerous chemicals or some dangerous electrical item, he may not understand it's dangerous, but educated person knows it's dangerous. So what is to be feared and what is not to be feared? And bandham moksham chaya vetti. What will cause bondage and what will cause liberation? That a person understands. That intelligence which understands that is intelligence in the mode of goodness. So in one sense, the whole Bhagavad Gita is geared to guide us to about pravritti and nivritti. What is not just what is to be done and what is not to be done, but in which direction to let our consciousness go when it goes naturally, and in which direction to not let it go even if it goes in particular directions. So for example, Arjuna as a Kshatriya will naturally think about fighting a war. And Krishna tells, yes, you can and you should do that. But everybody has some lust, some greed, some anger. Don't let your consciousness go in that direction. That is nivritti. So pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. In this way, Krishna is telling Arjuna how he can make his intelligence well situated. And now there are actually half a dozen other verses which we could take, but I'll focus on one last verse. And this is the theme which I said in this verse, which is Mam evaishyasya. You will come to me. So asamshaya also comes many other places. Yati nastyatra samshaya. It's a few verses earlier. In the 5th verse, Krishna talks about no samshaya, asamshaya. It's the same thing. No doubt. Without any doubt, he will come to me. But mam evaishyasya, you will come to me. Now this phrase, or some cognate means something related, something similar to that. It comes not to once more, twice more, but it comes 11 times more in the Gita. So this is the only word phrase that is repeated so many times. And Mam evaishyasi means you will come to me. This is the essential message of Krishna, that Krishna wants us to come to him. Krishna loves us, and because he loves us, he longs for us to be united with him. And the Bhagavad Gita is a message of Krishna's heart being opened and his love being expressed. So he is expressing his love and he is inviting his love. And Mame Vaishyasi, and he wants us to come to his abode, because that is the place where love reigns supreme, where love is endless and endlessly relishable. And Krishna says, you will surely come to me. So that different people analyze the Gita in different ways. Some people say Karma Yoga is the essence of the Gita. Some people say Dhyan Yoga is. Some people say, different people have different ideas. But if you look at the Gita itself, one of the traditional ways of understanding what is the essential message of a book, there are various ways of understanding it. What comes in right in the beginning, because that indicates what is the subject. Like if you're saying today I'll speak on this topic, so what is spoken right in the beginning indicates the subject. Or we can say what is spoken at the end, like it's a summary or a conclusion, carry home message or essential conclusion. That indicates what is the essential point of a book. So that's how one of the ways in which we understand the message is what is repeated most frequently. So, Mam Evaishyasya, you will come to me. There's no other theme in the Gita which is repeated as many times as this. You will come to me. If you do this, you will come to me. You do so now. That means that this is the abhyas. Abhyas means this repetition that indicates that this is a message which is specially important for Krishna. And Krishna uses the word Mame Vaishyasi in different contexts, but the essential point is if you become devoted to me, you will come to me. So Krishna is a God of endless love. And Krishna's love, sometimes we may ask, is it conditional or is it unconditional? If you want to love Krishna, it is said that you have to follow so many rules, and some of the rules are quite difficult. So then is Krishna's love conditional or unconditional? So, it is both. No, Krishna loves us as we are, but he loves us too much to let us stay as we are. He loves us as we are. We might be materialistic, we might be even demoniac, but Krishna never forsakes our heart. He's always there in our heart. There is never nothing that we can ever do which can separate us from the infinite love of the infinite. So Krishna loves us as we are. But at the same time, Krishna wants for us the riches of eternal love. And for gaining that riches, we need to open our heart. We can't relish eternal love if we are loving temporary objects. The sun can give light, but if we are looking inside a tunnel, the sun's light will not be seen for us. And that's not a deficiency of the sun, that is a mistake on our part. So as long as we are loving the temporary, Krishna cannot give us the gift of eternal love. So he wants to give us that gift. And therefore, in that sense, Krishna wants our love to evolve from the temporary towards the eternal. So in that sense, Krishna's love is conditional. We can experience Krishna's eternal love to the extent we start turning toward Krishna. The sun might be giving light, but if we are looking into a tunnel, we can't perceive the sun's light. But if we lift our head up from down into the, say, the underground tunnel that is there, we start underground catacomb or passageway that is there. From there, we start looking upward. The more we start looking upward, the more we start seeing the sun, and then the more we start seeing the brightness coming from the sun. Similarly, as long as our love is directed toward worldly things, we can't perceive Krishna's love. But as we start turning our eyes and our heart toward Krishna, the more we start perceiving his love. And for Arjuna, in the context of the Bhagavad Gita, a terrible situation had befallen him. Those whom he loved, those whom he venerated, he had to fight against them. And how could he become so cold-hearted? How could he become so brutish that he fights against those whom he has respected and worshipped? So it's not the Bhagavad Gita doesn't teach the rejection of love, doesn't teach the suppression of love. It teaches the evolution of love. Krishna tells Arjuna that you are loving Bhishma and Drona, but they are also souls, and you are also a soul. They are on their spiritual journey, you are on your spiritual journey. And if you do your spiritual duty, you will move ahead in your spiritual journey, and they will also move ahead in their spiritual journey. So at a material level, it might be brutal to shoot arrows at someone whom we love. But at a spiritual level, by that action done according to the will of the Lord, everybody will evolve. So that vision empowers Arjuna. He understands that if I will do Krishna's will, even if the external actions seem very unloving, seem harsh, but ultimately they will all take everyone towards Krishna's infinite love, Krishna's supreme love. So the Gita reveals through this repetition of Mam Avaishyasya that Krishna's love is the ultimate reality. And there are various realities. Right now, there is a pandemic going on. We might be having some sickness. We might be having some relationship problems. We might be having some financial issues. Yes, all these are realities. And we have to deal with them at an appropriate level. But beyond all these realities, the supreme reality is that Krishna loves each one of us. And every situation in our life is an opportunity for us to offer our love to Krishna, to direct our consciousness from the world toward Krishna. And that was the redirection that happened for Arjuna. And he says Arjuna was disheartened, putting aside his bow, thinking, I can't fight. But by the end of the Gita, after hearing the Gita, he raised his bow in readiness to fight. Similarly, we all may be disheartened in various ways. But if we hear the message of the Gita, we internalize the message of the Gita, and then we will also become enlivened. We might have become disheartened as Arjuna had become disheartened. We might have put aside our determination, our enthusiasm, our confidence, but all of those will be restored if by studying the Gita we understand that Krishna's love for us is the ultimate reality. And beyond whatever contextual situations we are facing, if we act in a way to express our love for Krishna through doing whatever service we can, then all these contextual realities, they will eventually disappear, and the supreme reality of Krishna's love for us will become manifested. This was the reality in which Prabhupada lived. And that's why when Prabhupada came to America, he was all alone. He was penniless. His body had been traumatized by 2 severe heart attacks. But what is Prabhupada saying at that time? Boro Krupa Koile Krishna Adamera Prati. That you have been immensely merciful to me. Now, if we look at it from material perspective, we say, what mercy is there? There is no money, there are no contacts, there is not even good health. Where are you, God? Where is your mercy? That would be the normal material vision. But what was Prabhupada? Prabhupada was only seeing Krishna's love. He's saying that Krishna, through my spiritual master, had given me the instruction to share bhakti in the Western world. And now, in my old age, I have this opportunity. And just for having this opportunity, I'm very grateful. Prabhupada's coming to America itself was a miracle. What happened after that was also a far greater miracle. But Prabhupada was grateful simply that he had the opportunity to serve Krishna. So Prabhupada noticed the contextual reality of America with its flourishing material prosperity, with its languishing morality, and with its disappearing spirituality. But beyond it all, Prabhupada saw his visit to America as an opportunity provided by Krishna out of his love for him to serve Krishna. That Krishna had provided him this opportunity out of Krishna's love for him. And now he could reciprocate with that opportunity by serving Krishna. So Prabhupada lived and functioned at a different level. Although he was in New York, he was not in New York. He was with Krishna at Krishna's lotus feet, wherever he was. And the Bhagavad Gita's wisdom can enable us all to come to Krishna's lotus feet, wherever we might be. If we understand that Krishna's love for us is the supreme reality, and acting through whatever realities we are in to reciprocate with Krishna's love is the way we can create the most auspicious future for ourselves and for our loved ones and for the world at large. It is to reveal this ultimate reality of Krishna's love for us that the Bhagavad Gita was spoken. And today is the day when this sacred message we received thousands of years ago. We can pray that it becomes manifest in our heart more and more, and it becomes our supreme reality. And then that will help us to face whatever challenges life sends our way, and to go through them and to grow through them, to move closer and closer to the Lord of our heart. So I'll summarize what I spoke today. I spoke on the theme of how Krishna is speaking here, how we see Krishna's message, speciality through the words and phrases that are repeated. So I talked about first, Naitpam Shoshitum Harasi, it does not behoove you to lament. That comes 4 times in 6 verses in 2nd chapter, because Arjuna is lamenting. Krishna is not just telling him don't lament, Krishna is telling him it doesn't behoove you to lament like this. That means you rise above these emotions. He's providing the education that can lead to the elevation of his emotions. When we talk about Yukta Asita Matparha, fix your mind on me. So the instruction is the same in the 2nd chapter. I talked about how the Bhagavad Gita is like a treasure hunt, and the ultimate treasure is at the end, but there are treats that are offered along the way. So the Bhakti Yoga, the love of Krishna's love for all of us, that is the ultimate treasure the Gita offers. But along the way, Krishna in the Gita drops hints of it. So Yukta Asita Matpara in the second chapter, which is largely at the Karma Yoga level. In the sixth chapter, which is largely at the Dhyan Yoga level, these are like the treats which Krishna is offering. And Prabhupada in his purports, he is not doing cancellation of Krishna's words. He is giving us the conclusion of Krishna's words throughout the Gita. That is out of his compassion. Then we discussed about several other phrases. Machitta. We discussed about fixing the consciousness on me. So that is, for the yogis, it is fixing the consciousness on Krishna is a tool for meditation. That for the Dhyan yogis. But for the devotees of Krishna, it is a goal of meditation. And Prabhupada's translation of 10.9, not just fix your mind on me, but the thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me. That indicates that Prabhupada is pointing out that for the devotees, Krishna is their home. And all of us, we have some particular home for our thoughts. That is where our thoughts go as soon as we don't have anything to think about. And we can pray that by the gradual practice of bhakti, Krishna becomes our inner home. Then we discussed Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu. It's repetition in 8.7 and then 8.27. So 8.7, Krishna is talking about how it's a clear bhakti exhortation, but saying that externals don't matter. As long as the internals are fixed on me, then you will attain me. In 8.27, the focus is on, yes, there are different paths of yoga. And if you, in different parts of yoga, sometimes you can die at a right time or wrong time. But you're practicing bhakti, then the time doesn't matter. Only the heart matters. Then I talked about Mai Arpit Mano Buddhir. That how it's Krishna is not just saying fix your mind on me over here, offer your mind and intelligence to me. So we talked about how this is also repeated in the 12th chapter of the Gita, and Prabhupada said this is the essential message of the Gita, that if our mind and intelligence are offered to Krishna, then we will be with Krishna will be with Krishna at all times. And then lastly, I concluded with Mam Evaishasya. You will come to me. And this literal phrase or its variants, Krishna repeats 12 times. One way of understanding what is the essential message of the book is to look at what is repeated most frequently. And this repetition that you will come to me indicates that this is a central message of the Gita. The Gita tells us that Krishna's love for us is the ultimate reality. Beyond whatever contextual realities we are facing and we have to navigate, if we remember that every situation is an opportunity provided, is Krishna expressing his love for us and giving us an opportunity to express our love for him. Then, just as Arjuna, who was disheartened by thinking that I had to fight against my loved ones, but he became enlivened on understanding that actually I will be participating in an activity which will lead to the elevation of everyone, my elevation and the elevation of my loved ones also. That gave him confidence. Similarly, for all of us also, by studying the Gita, we understand that Krishna's love for us is the ultimate reality. Then we also will become enlivened. Just as Arjuna picked up his bow, we can also become rejuvenated. We can also become determined. And we can face whatever life's challenges might be there and move toward Krishna ultimately. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhu, for such an intellectually stimulating and also devotionally inspiring lecture.
Happy to be of service, Prabhu.
I have just unmuted all the devotees. If you'd like to ask a question or a comment or appreciation, please feel free to do so. Adi Prash, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Advishnu, Dandavat. You are muted, Prabhu.
Your enthusiasm. Your
Thank
enthusiasm,
you.
just your heart overflowing with faith and enthusiasm for devotional service in this presentation of the truth is very impressive. We would like to mention this is Christmas Day. Christmas, Christmas. The appearance day of Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah, and Srila Prabhupada said Jesus is our guru. This is a person by his life and teaching exemplary exemplifying surrender to Krishna.
Yes,
And we acknowledge that, and we glorify this quality of total surrender, that of love for
yes.
Krishna.
There's a beautiful symmetry we can say between. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yes, today's Christmas. So actually, in the purport of 4.7 and 8 in the Gita, Sambhavami Yuge Yuge, that I come again and again. So Prabhupada mentions in that purport that Krishna comes sometimes, and sometimes he sends his son, and sometimes he sends his messenger. So Krishna comes in various manifestations, and Prabhupada said Jesus is also the son of God. So surrender has two aspects to it. Now, Jesus, when he knew on his penultimate night that the next day he was going to die, he was going to be killed. So he prays to the Lord and he says that, let this cup pass, O Father, but let thy will be done. So let thy will be done is an expression of surrender.
Right.
That even when the Lord's will may be very difficult for us, so that is an expression of surrender. Now, at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna also expresses surrender. Now, Arjuna's surrender is in a slightly different mood. It says, Karishye vachnam tava. It is not just let thy will be done, it is I will do thy will. So, I will do thy will. That means in our life, there are two aspects. There are some things in our control and some things are not in our control. And the things that are not in our control, accepting those gracefully, that is surrender. And that is the surrender which Jesus manifested, especially during his last days when he accepted the crucifixion. And the other aspect of surrender is what the Bhagavad Gita specifically focuses on, is that whatever is in our control, we need to do diligently. And that diligence in doing our seva, doing our service, doing our offering to the Lord, that is also a surrender. So surrender can be expressed through dependence on the Lord, which is what Jesus demonstrates, especially in his final lesson. And devotion can be expressed through our diligence for the Lord, diligence in doing our service to the Lord. And that is what the Gita demonstrates. So let thy will be done for the things that are not in our control, and let me do thy will for the things that are in our control. So thank you very much for reminding me that about Christmas, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare
Can I ask
Krishna.
one question? Yes.
Yes, Prabhu.
You were saying that Krishna loves us both conditionally and unconditionally.
Yes.
Conditionally because he wants us to grow. So
Yes.
my question is about the unconditional part. How can we perceive in our lives that, let's say, even if we don't follow his instructions, that we can still find evidence that he loves us even in those circumstances? Because that
Yes.
would be unconditional, right?
Correct. Yes. So how can we perceive Krishna's unconditional love, even if, say, we are not devoted to him or we're not practicing any rules or anything like that? I have done this exercise with people who are a little spiritually inclined, that ask them, have you at any time sensed the existence of some higher power? And have you experienced some higher intervention in your life? And people who externally seem to be not at all devotional, they also come up with amazing experiences. There's a time when I was completely hopeless and all the doors seemed to be closed, and then this happened, and so I felt that there's something higher going on. Now, people may not specifically understand that is Krishna and that is Krishna's love, but just the generic understanding that there is something higher beyond me, and that higher power is first of all, it's existing, and that higher power intervenes in my life. Everybody who's a little thoughtful, they can get that experience, and it requires philosophical education to connect that experience with Krishna's love. So I'll give an example by what I mean. When a baby is newborn, at that time, a baby doesn't understand anything. The baby starts crying, and then when the mother breastfeeds the baby just suckles the breast and gets something to drink. Initially, the baby doesn't even understand that actually this is a person, this is my mother, she loves me, and she's offering her milk to me. As the baby starts growing, so initially it's just whether I am getting what I need or not. But then as the baby starts growing, then baby starts saying, okay, whether I'm getting what I want or not is important, but who is it giving to me? The vision shifts to the mother, and gradually the baby starts recognizing the mother. And then imagine, say it's very cold and the baby is sleeping, and suddenly the temperature drops and the baby starts shivering. And now the baby's eyes are closed, but the mother sees the baby is shivering, and then the mother puts a comforter on the baby. Now, when the mother puts that comforter, the baby is not has not opened the eyes and seen the mother over there. But the baby knows, oh, my mother must be here. She must have put this comforter on me. So it's more like it's not a conscious observation. It's more like a subconscious comprehension, subconscious apprehension of a reality. So similarly for us, initially, if we are too self-obsessed, then the only thing we are concerned is whether I get what I want or not. Now, who is it giving it to me? We don't care for it at all. And if we don't get what we want, then we just get so emotionally caught and we get frustrated. And we start thinking that maybe God doesn't exist because I'm not getting what I want. But over a period of time, as we start becoming, as a consciousness starts evolving, then we start perceiving, yes, there is a provision, but there must be a provider. So we are like spiritually asleep right now. So we can't see Krishna. We can't see Krishna, but in situations of great difficulty, sometimes we can experience some relief comes in some mysterious ways. And that relief is like Krishna putting a comforter on us. And we can experience that relief when, say, for example, when we practice some limb of bhakti, when we're very disturbed, but we hear some class, we get absorbed in some kirtan, and it's almost all our anxieties, all our frustrations, they just disappear. So what has happened? We were trembling because of the cold, but that Krishna consciousness became like a comforter, and that provided us relief. So we need philosophical education to connect that relief that we experience in the remembrance of Krishna with Krishna's love for us. So the comforter is not the mother. The comforter is an expression of the mother's love for the baby. So similarly, when we absorb ourselves in Krishna and when we experience relief at that time, that we need to see as Krishna's love for us. Now, because Krishna is a person and Krishna has a plan for us, so sometimes we may pray and we may not experience relief. And rather than seeing that as evidence that God is not there, we can see maybe there is some other plan. And maybe there is the relief that will come in some other way for us. So to link our present experiences with Krishna's plan and Krishna's benevolence, that is what philosophical education is meant to provide us. And that's why we see Parikshit Maharaj, he was cursed. And cursed so terribly unfairly. For a minor indiscretion, he was cursed to die. But he did not say, why did he do like this? And why did I do like that? And why is life like this? So okay, this is the Lord acting to detach me from this entangling material world and to help me focus on him. So Parikshit Maharaj lived in the reality, lived in the understanding that Krishna's love for me is the ultimate reality. And that's how he was able to connect that curse, however brutal and unfair it was, with an opportunity provided by Krishna to come closer to him. So similarly, by studying scriptures, by associating with devotees, and by contemplating on the examples of the great saints who are able to see Krishna's love for them in every situation, we can also learn to see in our present experiences the benevolent hand of Krishna. Does it answer your question?
Boy, so beautifully. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So this is a very sacred day. Let us all pray that the Bhagavad Gita's message register in our heart and reside in our heart. So, shall we stop here?
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Yes.
Thank you
Although
very
we would like to hear more, I understand like it's your time and also others' time. So we're very grateful for you for taking out 2 days continuously to speak on Gita. Thank you very much, Prabhu. Hare
Thank you
Krishna.
very much. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai.
His Grace
Shri
Chaitanya Charan
Prabhupada
Prabhu ki
ki
jai.
jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande.